Hello there guys, Daniel Charles back here again. Hope you're doing really well. And we know that Enzo Maresca is basically all but confirmed Chelsea's new head coach. The contracts are going to be signed if they haven't already, and we are just awaiting formal confirmation from the club that he is the new head coach to replace Mauricio Pochettino. A lot of people have started to do their predicted lineups, how Chelsea could look under Enzo Maresca. I did this for Mauricio Pochettino last summer. It seemed to go down well, so I thought I'd do a sequel to that. And knowing Chelsea, it might be a trilogy next summer for another new head coach. But let's try and be optimistic with Enzo Maresca. You can see my full reaction. That's the last video or podcast, where you're consuming this, on the show. So we're going to go through my predicted lineup. And I think the difficulty of Maresca compared to Pochettino is obviously there's not a lot of evidence and not a lot of stuff to look at in terms of a track record, because Enzo Maresca barely coached Parma, very short period there, and he's only had one season in English football at Leicester. So a lot of people are basing their predictions, and I don't think it's illogical because you don't have a lot to look at compared to, as I say, Pochettino, where you could look at Southampton, you could look at Espanyol, you could look at Tottenham, obviously, all he did there. You could even look at PSG. Not the same with Maresca, and because it's very close, you'd suspect that maybe Maresca would want to continue what he did ideas-wise with Chelsea, and also you can couple that with what Chelsea did last year and specifically at the end of the season with Pochettino, because there are clear tactical and kind of shape-wise similarities with what Maresca could want to do with certain players who thrived at the end of Chelsea's last season. So we're kind of going with a 4-2-3-1 because that was what Maresca used predominantly with Leicester. Now, there is obviously variation within game to this. So they could start looking like a 4-2-3-1, but in possession, it's very well known that Maresca likes to have specifically his right back move into central midfield. This, for a lot of the season, was Ricardo Pereira, who fulfilled this role very adequately, very effectively. He added an extra body to central midfield. It created overloads. It gave Leicester a sense of protection and balance within their team. And as well, if a team would press Leicester, they'd be looking for that spare man. It very much is obvious with the way Leicester want to build up. And I think in balance in terms of defence and attack, you would see a nice kind of split between having 5 players in defence, 5 players in attack. And that would obviously help balance things out and stop potential transition opportunities. This had to be tweaked a little bit later on in the season in terms of personnel, because Pereira did suffer an injury. He is a little bit of an injury-prone player, so Maresca did weigh a lot on him. And once he dropped out the team, you saw Chowdhury go into that position. James Justin took up that position as well. So there was some variation, but looking at how Chelsea ended their season, where Marco Correa from the left would move into central midfield for Pochettino, it's understandable why people are already looking at similarities and saying, is Maresca just going to continue to do that? Or maybe a Reece James, a Malo Gusto could take up that place. So let's start. 4-2-3-1, 4-2-2-2. Sometimes it's going to look like a 3 at the back, but let's stick with a 4-2-3-1. In goal, we're already hearing reports that Chelsea may want to sign a goalkeeper who's confident on the ball. Now, this could happen, but I do think there are some risks attached, namely what happened with Kepa Arrizabalaga. And if you're going to sacrifice some of those very important things that a goalkeeper needs in terms of his ability to dominate, height, physicality, chemistry with the defence, I'm not so focused on that being the key. And if we're just looking for a keeper who aesthetically looks a little bit nicer with the ball at his feet, like comfortable, but he is limited in other areas, then I think that's going to be a huge problem for Maresca. And I think that Đorđe Petrović, sure, isn't the greatest with the ball at his feet, but by no means is he terrible with it. Robert Sanchez was deemed to be wonderful with the ball at his feet, but Chelsea looked a far more vulnerable team whenever Robert Sanchez was in goal compared to Petrović. And Petrović, I think, improved that in that aspect, and I think generally is a strong goalkeeper, young goalkeeper who can develop further. So I'd rather keep Petrović unless you are going out there and signing someone who truly is going to transform this position. Again, let's stick with the players we have. Reece James, obviously, at right back. If he's fit, which of course is a big if, and we have to bear in mind he won't be starting the season in the Premier League because he's going to have to see out his suspension. So quite naturally, Malo Gusto would take this place. But Reece James fulfilling a Ricardo Pereira role seems very obvious. For long times, we've been talking about Reece James potentially moving into central midfield. This is something that, of course, Trent Alexander-Arnold has been doing as well for Liverpool, and just kind of the natural modern evolution of a right back doing a lot more on the ball. And you think about the influence Reece James has for a Chelsea team, and when he is on the pitch, how much we look towards him for creativity, for link up, for building up. It's understandable why Reece James would be seen and deemed to be this type of player. Marc Cucurella, obviously, if he sticks around, could play this role from the left, moving into central midfield. I think you can almost see a scenario where both fullbacks, whoever they are, might take up this position naturally during the game. I know sometimes it seems a little bit more lopsided, but I think there is room for Maresca to play with here. And Malo Gusto, I have a lot of confidence, could fulfill this role too. Ben Chilwell, I think, is more of a wing back slash, someone who needs to be getting forward a lot more. I think he does his best work when he is on the flank. So I'm not quite sure Ben Chilwell fits this role. The left back area is one that's kind of concern for Chelsea. But in terms of Reece James, is obviously going to be starting if he remains fit, which obviously is a big if. Trevor Chalobah, for me, needs to be kept by Chelsea. He had a brilliant end to the season. I think tactically is someone that can take on a lot of information very quickly. Very durable, has played under several head coaches now and improved, and I think has impressed with all of them, whether that be Thomas Tuchel, Graham Potter or Mauricio Pochettino. I think in all three cases, he's quickly shown his ability to be a competent and at times very good and effective defender. On the ball too, I think he's underrated in that aspect. So I would be having Chalobah in central defence. I think Levi Colwill very much needs to step up and take a dominant role in defence. With a potential back three, obviously you do have Axel Disasi. We'll see what happens with Wesley Fofana, Benoit Badiashile on the left side of defence. But I just look at Chalobah and Colwill as a centre-back pairing that I would like to see tried, especially if you do keep Chalobah, and Colwill on the left side of the fence, seeing what he could do, especially in possession. If Chelsea were to move to a back three, he could obviously move into a left centre-back role very naturally. But in this formation, I mean, I do like the idea of Malo Gusto staying in the team as a left back. I kind of felt this throughout recent months, and this is not to demean what Marc Cucurella did. Now, I'd like to see Cucurella continue with that form because obviously it's a good thing, but I think Gusto just adds so much to the team defensively and offensively. I think he's a good creator. Obviously, this would be in his, on the other side, more of an unfavoured role for him, but I still think that Gusto is such a reliable figure for Chelsea. I do ponder whether he could become a Cesar Azpilicueta type figure for Chelsea, and will just make his way into the team because he is a little bit versatile. Central midfield, Caicedo and Fernandes. It's the big thing because for a whole season under Pochettino, it didn't really work. And, it was notable that the moment Fernandes got injured, required surgery, it seemed like suddenly Chelsea's midfield clicked. Now, I don't know if that's purely because of Enzo Fernandes or it's a fact that Pochettino started to move, say, Marc Cucurella into central midfield and the flow of the team started to work a lot better. I think it's very simplistic to say Enzo went out of the team, Chelsea started winning. That's the reason. That's, I think, a cause and effect that I think is a little bit too simplistic. And I can't believe that because of the amount that Chelsea have invested in Enzo Fernandes, and also factoring in that for a lot of the season he was playing injured, which is very difficult, obviously. So to write off Enzo Fernandes would be silly. And actually, when you look at some of his performances when he first arrived at Chelsea, and also at the start of last season before he reportedly got this injury that he then played with for a long period of time, there is a very good player there. Technically on the ball, he's comfortable in possession. You think there are a lot of things that tick the boxes of Enzo. I think the big thing for Enzo is off the ball. If we're going to play a very ball-dominant style of play, and that balance in central midfield needs to be key. Caicedo's dominance improved as the season went on, and it's just interesting to see whether he can continue that development as someone who's going to continue to be dominant, or whether a changing coach slightly changes his trajectory at Chelsea. Hopefully for the better, not for the worse. But I think getting these two players in a starting 11 is going to be one of the big things for Maresca, whether it can work or not. And obviously that's a big question mark, but I'd like to think it can work because I think both of these players are very, very good midfielders who, especially in the case of Caicedo, was wonderful at the end of Chelsea's season. So then we get into the more complex area of the pitch. For me, it's pretty simple, but there are many variations you could put here in terms of a three behind the striker. Firstly, we're going to look at obviously Cole Palmer. Cole Palmer for me is still best on the right. I'd like to see him coming off the right, but obviously we saw in the latter half of the season, especially in that last run-in, he started to play more central. But Cole is such a good figure, like in terms of just having a knack for being in the right place at the right time, for creating things, for finding new connections with his teammates, and obviously scoring some wonderful goals. I don't think it's like do or die, but I just think for the majority of the season he played off the right. I'd like to see him continue in that aspect, but we know if he can be given a little bit of freedom in this, he can float, he can move into different areas, and he can still be as impactful. So Cole Palmer is obviously one of the very first names on the team sheet because he is Chelsea's best player currently, so he has to be starting. Number 10, it's going to be Conor Gallagher. I just can't see past Conor if he remains. I think that Enzo, like a lot of head coaches, I feel like Conor is a little bit like Mason Mount in the sense that people keep writing him off and think that when you change head coach, a new coach will come in and just, for some reason, see the light in a tactical way and take Conor Gallagher out. Like, I think football is football and there are very basic things in football that remain. And having a player who covers as much ground as Conor Gallagher, who is tactically as intelligent, who helps the performances of others, who obviously offensively too, I think was getting better as the season went on. I just don't see how a team without Conor Gallagher, it's just if he is still in the Chelsea squad, a bit like Chalobah, I just think their quality will see through eventually, and I think Maresca will be leaning on him. So whether he's playing as an 8, a 6, a 10, out wide, whatever it is, I think Gallagher will once again find his place in the team, because I think those are players that you are foolish if you overlook, because they are still required in a good team. Christopher Nkunku, this is the thing I kept saying at the end of last season, right? That Nkunku, I could see playing a variety of roles. And I think that's the privilege that Maresca has, is that he does have players like Nkunku who could play as a 10, a second striker, a number 9. There's debate over what position is best for him. He had a really good performance off the bench against Brighton, where he did move to a left wing position, replacing Mykhailo Mudryk. He scored that night for Chelsea, a very important goal. So I like to see what Nkunku could do over pre-season. I think he could play in a front two with Cole Palmer or Nicholas Jackson. And I think the great thing about Jackson is we also saw his ability on the channel in terms of being able to go a little bit wider and that actually freeing him a little bit. But I do think Jackson as a centre forward developed massively last season from Mauricio Pochettino. And when I look at some of the moves that Enzo Maresca's team completed, especially if you involve the centre forward dropping deeper, receiving the ball, laying it off, turning, running, making space, opening up space for others, holding up the ball. Very basic centre forward things, but these were things that Jackson did and got better as the season went on. And his goal tally was nothing to sniff at too, given the context of when he came into Chelsea and his lack of senior minutes. So I think that Jackson fulfills a role in this team as maybe a centre forward, a very impactful one. I think the big question is in the transfer market, obviously, will Chelsea look to strengthen in central attack with another centre forward with links to the likes of Victor Osimhen, the likes of Benjamin Sesko and others? Whether Chelsea look to strengthen in that area, you've also got the ability to potentially bring back David Datcha Fofana, who was on loan last season, and whether he would remain at Chelsea. There are big question marks over that too. But I still do think that Jackson, a bit like Gallagher, fulfills a very impactful role in this team. And I think in most teams, I think will be someone that coaches will look to lean on over the course of a season. And hopefully Maresca, with a team that hopefully can create a few more opportunities, will hopefully improve Jackson and make him a better player, because I think Jackson is going like that, and I think it's important that we continue that development and don't just throw it away, because Chelsea could be losing out on a very good centre forward here who already has proven a lot with a lot of criticism and scrutiny. So that is the team. Obviously, I haven't added dream signings. A Michael Elise, I think, would be a brilliant signing for Chelsea. Eze would be a brilliant signing for Chelsea too. A new left back potentially. A new centre-back could be thrown in as well. But I've kind of just wanted to look at the squad that he has at his disposal. And again, pointing to the fact that because Chelsea had so many injuries last season, it's so difficult to kind of gauge the true quality of Chelsea's current squad. Also bearing in mind, it's a young squad that is now had a year experience under their belts. And, whether it is actually smarter for Chelsea to kind of keep the powder dry this summer, which I know is going to be very difficult for Chelsea to do and very difficult for fans, I think, to accept, because even with some positives we have laid out here, there obviously is a fact that Chelsea still missed out on Champions League football. There were games where Chelsea did fall victim to wasting chances. I think also a lack of height within the team. I think that is one of the big things that if you're going out in the transfer market defensively, you have to improve. You have to look for taller defenders, more aerially dominant defenders, because from set pieces, Chelsea were too weak. And that goes back to the goalkeeper situation, because you may feel that Chelsea need a goalkeeper who's comfortable in possession, but if they are not the tallest, if they are not dominant at set pieces, then Chelsea really haven't addressed that issue, and maybe overlooking Petrovic actually makes the situation a little bit worse. So it's not as simple as, well, we've got this head coach, he needs a certain type of player, but then not factoring in all the other variables that make a very effective Premier League team. So for me, that's why I've looked mainly at the current the current squad that head coach Enzo Maresca will be looking at, and I just hope that we can continue to see the progression. I you know my thoughts on this appointment, but I do undeniably think there is talent there. And I think if Enzo Maresca can show what he did very quickly at Leicester is getting his group of players to play a very fluid brand of football, I think there is absolute talent there and chance for Chelsea to have a better season. There are a lot of variables within that, of course, but I do think there is talent there, and that's why I wanted to do this show today. So please do in the comments below, give me your predicted lineups and your thoughts ahead of next season, and I'll see you again very soon. All the best.